So I like to think I know one or two things about people and one or two things about business and strategy and scaling. But yeah, I'm never going to claim to be a person that knows a lot about tech, and especially not Web 3.0, generative AI, things like that. So I think what I wanted to do now is a little bit go on a different point. Instead of just talking about scaling, is talk about Web 3. Now, in the macro world, in the tech world, in the markets, obviously there's going to have implications of how we think strategically about our businesses moving forward and how the world's going to be evolving. But I think it's also a very misunderstood topic, misunderstood industry, misunderstood space. But even in the label Web 3.0 is implying that this is the way of the future. It might be in the early stages, but it's where we're going. So I think for anyone to understand it a bit better in terms of your business and how this might apply to you, this is what I want to learn more about. So this is why I'm chatting to Ross Drakes from Nice Work, who specializes in Web 3.0 and helping create very purposeful brands in this new era of the internet. So hope you enjoy this conversation, because I'm assuming it's going to be very fascinating.
There's incentive for the customers to actively engage with you and actively improve the product for their selfish reasons. But now, because there's an ownership layer there, in theory, they could get that product for free, or maybe that product will pay itself back because you can take their work that they do internally and sell it to the bigger kind of ecosystem of people that you are working with. Because, you and your dev team are only 5 people, 10 people, 100 people, whatever. You can only think with 100 minds. But, suddenly you put that in your customers' hands and they think of 5, 6, 7 things that you never thought your product could do, in places it could never go. But now there's a reason for them to sort of funnel that information back into you. So now you're building with your customers at the same time. So they're buying from you because you're solving their pain, but they also have an opportunity to sell back to you in a seamless sort of way.
Welcome to The Founder Files, the podcast that's like eavesdropping on a conversation with a successful entrepreneur over a fireside chat. Join me, Cameron Coutts, through this unique experience of unfiltered stories and insights from scaling founders around the globe as they share their ups, downs, and everything in between. Ross, welcome to the Founder Files. Have to be honest, this is the first in-depth conversation I'm having about Web3 since starting this podcast. So I think this is something I'm very interested in getting into, and I think the timing now is also really good, because where generative AI has become, the ultimate topic in the tech space about what's going on, where Web3 is still very much in its early development and still making strides. I think having a reminder and having a conversation about this technology and what this means for business and everything that can be done. And also tech isn't my thing. So I'm super excited to get into this conversation and learn a couple of things from you. But yeah, I think before getting into it, do you want just giving a bit of your kind of context and background and how you got to where you are now, where now is the right timing to be talking about this topic?
Sure. I mean, my name is Ross Drakes, like you mentioned. Amongst many other things, I'm the founder of a company called Nice Work. And at Nice Work, we build brands that people care about. So it's all about figuring out what it is that connects to human beings to get them to attach importance to a product or a service or a company or a brand or a philosophy or whatever that is. That's what we spent the last 16 years delving into. And then sort of 2021, we were kind of captivated by this emergent thing called NFTs. And it was interesting for me because I've always been quite passionate about new technologies and playing with them. So I had a brief stint in 2007 when I was trading Bitcoin and doing all of that kind of crazy stuff. And it was a lot of fun, but it was so far away from the work that I did that it was always just a side hustle thing that I talked to my friends about. And suddenly in 2021, there was this visual medium that kind of contained all of the best stuff of cryptocurrencies, but there was now like pictures and videos and sounds and all of these other things attached to it. And it was also sort of roughly at the same time that things like Bored Ape Yacht Club exploded in popularity. And we got super interested in this technology, and we met a few companies in the US, and we were branding them and immersing ourselves in this. And we were so sort of excited by it that we chose to specialize in it. And to date, sort of probably 70% or 80% of our work is now focused around Web3. And I guess for the listeners, it's good to give a bit of context. Like, my definition of Web3 is a bundle of technologies that are defining the next iteration of the internet. And there's a few things underneath that. One is that it's all based on decentralization, which is why blockchain works so well. So in the internet we're on right now is controlled by a few companies. So Google, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, these people control sort of 80% of the traffic, of the data, of all of that kind of stuff. And we've seen things like Cambridge Analytica and, the Panama files and all of these things, which is where centralization of information fails and where people don't own the information. So that's the one thing, is about decentralization. The other thing is that Web 1, as we understood it, was an open source experiment. This is going back to things like GeoCities and, before there were even standards and principles, and everyone was sort of experimenting, but it was a one-way street. So you would write stuff to the internet. Like that was, you would just put stuff on the internet and people could read it. So they couldn't interact back with you. The next iteration of the internet, Web 2, was characterized by read-write. So now things like Blogger came along, and you could actually post content online, and then people could comment and edit. And so it sort of changed the entire dynamic. And that's the principle on which the social internet was born, and how we all feel like we're content creators because we have this ability to sort of push information back. Now, in the third iteration of the internet, Web 3, there's this ownership layer that's been created, right? So using blockchain technology and layering on this thing of a non-fungible token on top of it, essentially you can create true digital ownership online. Because in order for you to own something, it needs a couple of things. One is you need to be able to identify that it's yours. So like this pen is super easy for me to go, this is mine, it's in my hand. No one can really come to you and go like, no, that's actually not your pen. It's my pen. I mean, you could try to do that, but we could have an argument. But I've got this physical item. Now, online, how do you do that? How do you actually go, this is mine? And that's what these NFTs do, is they create like a digital signature that's on a block that you can say that I own this picture, this sound, this bundle of information. I can prove that on this date, this was mine. So you've got this idea of kind of identification that's really important. And then the second thing is you need to be able to transfer ownership for it to be valuable, because it doesn't help that I own something, but no one will buy it from me. It's like those companies that sell stars. You buy star number 4,732, but what do I do with that? Like, it's not like I can get in a space rocket and fly there and land on the star and be like, cool, you're mine now, I'm going to start building stuff. I can maybe try and sell you that certificate. So we need interoperability in order for these things to work. And once again, blockchain allows that too, because it allows me to then go, cool, I'm going to sell you this, Cameron. This picture of this pen is mine. And you going, okay, I want to buy it. And I'm going to buy it for $5. And you transfer me $5 and I transfer you ownership of this pen. Now, I can't then turn around and be like, well, I didn't do that transaction because it's recorded on a ledger and it's an immutable ledger, so I can't dispute that. So there's now this ownership layer, which is really interesting. And I know there are things like IP and stuff that allows people to sort of protect their digital rights. But if you've ever been involved in an IP court case, it's not easy, it's not straightforward, and it's not available to the general masses, where this kind of thing actually is. Now, sort of, I guess, to circle all of this together, come back to this idea of making people care, making people feel something. The things we care about the most, the things that motivate us the most, the things that drive us the most are things that we either feel or have ownership in. So like, I care deeply about my family because they are my family. I care more about my family than I do about your family because they're your family, not my family. And I would assume the opposite is true for you. And it's the same thing with the objects I own, or the companies, or the brands that I choose to support, or the bands that I choose to listen to, or the restaurants that I choose to frequent. They become mine. Now, interestingly, forever brands have traded off perceived value, right? Or perceived ownership. Think of, I don't know, who's your favorite football team?
Arsenal, no hesitation.
Arsenal. So Arsenal, you feel the sense of, like, Arsenal's your team. You feel a sense of ownership over them. You probably own a shirt or two, or a logo, or a scarf, or something, so you can signify to the world that I feel ownership over this brand. And you might even get into an argument with someone in a bar because Manchester United's playing Arsenal, and you now decide you don't like this person because they don't support your team and they've kind of offended you by their mere presence. And you'll get into an argument about who's kind of better. Now, you are behaving from a place of perceived ownership, where the reality is the owner of Arsenal could shut it down tomorrow. He could email everyone and be like, cool, you're all fired. We're burning the stadium to the ground. We are removing ourselves from the Premier League, and we will never play again. And there is absolutely nothing you can do about that. And even if this goes back, 10 generations you've been supporting Arsenal, you have no real ownership in that thing. Now, imagine Arsenal could give you a tiny sliver of ownership where you now have an actual stake in Arsenal, and you can in a small way influence what they do, how they go, how they think about the world, the things they do, the players they select, the color of the jerseys, whatever it is that they feel that they wanted to kind of include you in. It adds a new layer of kind of interaction that you can have with this brand. And it's now no longer a perceived ownership, it's an actual, real, tangible ownership. Like, now imagine you owned a thing and you got to help them select a training regime, and then based on that training regime, if they were successful, you got financial return off the kind of back of it. This is the thing that these technologies start to unlock, like new ways that companies and individuals can sort of integrate without the messiness of being an equity partner in the business, which comes with certain liabilities and certain obligations and all these kind of things. So it's interesting.
That's the first thing. I'm sorry to cut you off, but like let's address the obvious question, because we're talking about ownership, and like that's the main topic here. How's this different to shares?
So it's a digital version of the same thing, so it can achieve the same thing. But a share, if you're a shareholder in a company, it comes with certain obligations, right? So you are saying that I'm putting money into this company, and I'm physically tied to the company and all of its operations. With a token, you can, instead of doing the entire company, you can give people ownership of certain areas. You can give them ownership of certain pieces. So it allows you sort of a wider gamut. And then it also...
So it's no longer the entity. It's about the fact that it's like specifically as you're going, it's like, let's say in terms of the design of football jerseys, is the fact that you can create tokens and some kind of ownership over that. And your scope is very limited, but now you've got a say in that, but you've got no say around training. And
but you also have no liabilities. So whatever, let's say there's fraud, in the football team, or if there is a deficit, so the company loses money and all the shareholders have to actually cough up, money to keep the company afloat, or their shares kind of become zero. So in a way, it protects the company because they can give ownership in specific pieces without selling ownership in a whole. Mm-hmm. They can also, and then as the individual, you don't have the liability of owning a piece of it. Also, to buy 1% of, Arsenal is you're going to need a hell of a lot of money, but to buy one of 5,000 shares in the 2023 football jersey color, is probably something that you could actually afford if it's something that you chose to be sort of passionate about. So it's not new, and it's not doing anything we've never done before, but it opens up a different avenue for these things to be kind of to be played with less kind of obligation on both parties' sides. So I think it opens up the ability to do that, and you can do all of these things with your own proprietary software. But part of what makes this interesting is the burden of security and the burden of verification don't sit on the companies, it sits on the blockchain, which is a much more robust thing. How often do you hear that TransUnion was hacked and all of the information's gone? So TransUnion hasn't protected that information properly, and now it's all out there. Whereas you never hear of the Ethereum block has been cracked and there are fraudulent transactions on the actual block. So it's the security layer is really interesting, and it's what allows, I think, people to participate at a much lower thing. So maybe Arsenal's a bad example because they have fairly infinite, kind of assets, but you could in your company leverage NFTs and blockchain and give your clients a little bit of ownership in a product or a service that you're co-designing with them. And at the cost of you, the individual, the small company owner, you don't have to bear the cost of securing that infrastructure, kind of providing them with a marketplace in which to sell it. All of these things come part and parcel if you buy into the technology layer.
I mean, this is such a it's so interesting because it's how we've philosophically always operated within a free market system, but also at the same time it's just a fundamentally different paradigm and different way of thinking that I feel like even for me is like where you've clearly been enlightened to the realities of Web3. I feel like I'm hoping by the end of this conversation something's going to click and I was like, I so totally get it. But I think the first point that I want to bring up now is just this the relationship between ownership and value. Right, because I think those are, you can own something and that value is how that's determined depends on you as an individual, but the concept of value is often quite subjective. And I think that an obvious example of this is if we look at, and I just want to obviously separate the technology of NFTs and non-fungible tokens versus the application of how we've seen that, as you mentioned, 2021, and the fact that like things like the Bored Ape Yacht Club is like 95% of NFTs have now become completely worthless. And this is, and the people still own that, but now that ownership is worth nothing besides their own subjective perception of value. So chat me through here because when, for example, if we're looking at shares, if we're looking at equity, if we're looking at purchase prices of garments and apparel, like there's very clear pricing based on supply and demand and economics. Right. But now if we're looking at ownership and value and the transferring of currency in exchange for ownership, I think this is a whole new realm that I think we're still figuring out. But what's your what do you like? What's your thesis on that?
So I guess like I always like to use real world examples to sort of contextualize this. Firstly, buying an NFT and expecting it to return 1,000%, 10,000%, 200,000% isn't investing, it's gambling. And it might happen and it might not. And I'm not one of the people who even understands how to create that kind of hype. So the first thing is I don't believe that buying an NFT is a good investment. Like that's because it is exactly that thing. It was all based on hype. There was no real value there. That said, if you look at a company like Tesla, right, Tesla's stock is massively overvalued. It's not linked to the reality of what's happening in that company. If you look at it, Nissan produces more electric vehicles in a month than Tesla does in a year. And yet Tesla's stock is 5 times more valuable than Nissan's.
Because of perceived
So
value due to brand.
it's perceived value, Elon Musk effect, the brand that they've built, the cars that they've designed, the way they just defined an entire market. They've done amazing things. So I'm not saying that they don't deserve that value, but it's not as equally linked as people always say it is. They're going like, there's a real company here. But if you were to break Tesla stock down into a number of cars produced per stock price thing, it's overvalued. Like they don't sell or make enough cars to justify the value of the stock price. So a lot of these things are sort of very similar that human beings operates. I mean, you're a psychologist, like we hold what we believe value is, and all these things is often not necessarily linked to the reality of what's happening. And we like to find reasons to sort of justify a more kind of guttural feeling that we have about something, and then we go and seek reasons to say this thing is kind of real. So firstly, I'd like to say that I think hype in the NFT world has distracted everyone from the value of what the technology can do, and I'm glad that it's kind of gone, because it's left people in the space who are building products and services where the technology is not the hero, but the actual use case of it is what is interesting.
I just want to comment on that before you continue, because I can see the train that you're on, but like that's such a very interesting point around the fact that what hype does is it completely inflates perceived value, and then naturally it's going to come back down. And then the point is like the potential for actual value and use then only starts to begin after the hype curve is done.
Yeah, I mean this is not new. This has happened a million times. Like look at social media when it first launched. There was that woman who put a webcam in her house, and she wasn't even doing it in like a sexy way. She just put a webcam in her house, and she lived in her house as she normally did. And she was getting 3, 4, 500 million people tuning in to watch her thing. I guarantee you, if you put a webcam in your house, nobody is going to log into it right now. Like, it's just not interesting anymore. But she was early, and there was this interesting hype, and nobody knew how to use it. So everyone was kind of doing these things. And what we all believed the use cases of social media would be, and what the use cases of social media are today, are two very different things. But the technology remained kind of consistent underneath all of that. It's just how we kind of perceived it. So this is the same thing. There were a couple of people who knew how to create hype and to generate value from that. And I always use the fashion industry because you can see these same sort of extremes. There's a company called Supreme, and Supreme does these weird things where they'll be like, we're now selling a lighter, and this lighter, they sell the lighter for $9, but people buy that thing and they immediately rush onto the internet and they chuck it on there for like $5,000 for a lighter, and people around the world go nuts for it, and they buy this lighter for $5,000 and they take it home and they stick it in their house, and it's a lighter with a Supreme logo on it. And then immediately after that, China sees this happening, and they just start smashing Supreme logos on red lighters, and they start flogging them to the world, and eventually they're being sold for like $1 or $2. Like, it's Supreme is the master of kind of creating a desire devoid of the inherent value of the thing that they're creating. And for some people, that's enough. They're quite happy to purchase that object knowing that it's not actually inherently worth that much money, but it's they're buying into this sort of mythology of Supreme and the hype of the whole thing. And this is, I guess, where branding comes in. This is the value of their brand, is allowing people to divorce the object from the reality of it and to buy into a sort of bigger concept.
So that also makes me think again, is like the concept of demand and value and attractiveness, is the fact that there's being exclusive, being rare, or being early. Sure, there's other ones. I mean, like, I just thumbsucked that straight off the spot there. But I think where the point that you're getting to is that the hype train, and what that's getting to is that it's the fact that I'm one of the first, and that because of that, it is also rare, and because of that, I'm part of the exclusive club.
Yes, and then, I'm first, or I'm cool. Yes. You know, and then I can play in this space. But coming back to fashion once again, would you rather own Supreme or would you rather own Zara? Like, Zara, in terms of finance, like, Zara turns over probably 100 times more than Supreme does, maybe even more, maybe 1,000 times more. But it's a fundamentally different business. They both sell clothing, but interestingly, they both need each other too. Like Zara needs Supreme to sort of push the fashion industry into new, weird, and interesting places. And Supreme needs Zara to follow on with copies of their products to create that desirability, because I can't buy a Supreme, but I can buy something that looks like a Supreme, you know, and therefore it keeps their perceived value kind of high. So there is a sort of ecosystem. So where we sit in the world of Web3 is we don't work in the kind of hype crazy space. We're helping companies that are using these to alter how people feel, how you connect to companies, how you connect to products. It's like it's a more functional level, but there's still really interesting stuff in there.
Yeah, so I think on that's the perfect point I was going to ask now, is because now that we've and this also just like, again, the hype there is like this generative AI is on like almost on the other side of the hype train now, because like that's, and like how hype usually works, it's like 6 months and then bye. And that's what's happening now.
Let me talk, like, just so on generative AI, it's a super interesting thing. So Chat GBT or Chat, so OpenAI is a 12-year-old company. So it's not new. It didn't arrive yesterday. It didn't blow up, right? They launched GBT 3.5, which was the GBT that got really, really popular and blew up. But they launched it about 7 months before it got popular, right? The thing that changed, the thing that allowed generative AI to become popular, is they changed the interface. So they moved it from a black and white terminal interface where you were prompting this AI and you had to be no little shortcuts like slashes and stars and hashes and what they meant, into a chat style interface. And as soon as they created a chat style interface, people could relate to a complex technology in a way that made sense to them, and then it blew up. And all of a sudden people are like, I didn't know this thing was there, but all of these products exist before. All of them were building long before this. So the hype train was created by the change in the interface. Now, coming back to Web3 and NFTs, they didn't change the interface. What happened is there was a financial benefit that was layered on top of it, which is a less sustainable thing. If there was an easier interface to interface with Web3, I believe it would have been more popular and lasted much longer. But because it was all about financial, people weren't interested in the Bored Ape Yacht Club because it was the Bored Ape Yacht Club. They were interested in it because people bought it for $1,000 and suddenly it was worth $250,000. And that's what people love. They love this idea that I can buy something for $100 and then be a billionaire. You know, so that was the thing that made Web3 become popular, and it's the wrong thing to kind of be popular. Now, I think the hype will last longer because people are interfacing with the technology in a much more natural way, as opposed to kind of Web3 and blockchain, where it's still fairly difficult to do if you're not a full-blown tech nerd.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's the point, is where maybe there's a lot of skepticism, cynicism, uncertainty around Web3, is because Web3, you just think Bitcoin and NFTs, right? And so your point there, it's about these value. And the reason why it got so hyped is because it was a get-rich-quick scheme, but now the get-rich-quick scheme is over. And so like, now people are like, this is, I'm no longer interested in playing with this toy. So, but you've used the word functional now a couple of times, and that's exactly what I want to get into now. So now that the hype train is over and we're getting to a bit more of a homeostasis in the Web3 technology world and how we're going to apply this, what are some functional use cases and examples that you're seeing that you think are working well for this technology and where it's headed?
Yeah, so I think there's a few places that people can think about. And one of them is, you know, we talked about this in the pre-interview, is that you can build with people and not for them, right? Because coming back to ownership, if you can give people ownership in the outcome of something that you're designing, they're more willing to participate with you in the creation of it. So traditionally, the way kind of products are created is you and your team have this idea, and then you sit in your room and you kind of build it and you test it and you iterate it, and maybe you take an agile approach and you push it out into the market, test with a few people, and then you kind of put it out there into the world and you hope that it's successful. Now you have the opportunity to find a core group of people who believe in the same thing you do and give them a token or let them buy in at a smaller kind of level, but also then participate in the benefit of it. Now, the example I can share, there's a company called StoryCo, which they're two brothers. They're Hollywood, ex-Hollywood people, and they believe there's a better way to create content for mass market than the model of Hollywood. And the model of Hollywood right now is that there's a whole bunch of underpaid writers or people who are getting nothing at all who write scripts, and they send them into these big Hollywood houses. And I guess since Netflix and Amazon, it's not just Hollywood, it's also Netflix and Amazon and Apple kind of doing this. So they get sent thousands of scripts. And then what happens is, if they decide that the script is worth it, they then consume almost all of the rights. So maybe the writer gets to keep a small piece of that, or maybe they just get a kind of fee, and then it's theirs in perpetuity, and they edit it and alter it and do whatever they want. And even sometimes those scripts don't get made if they don't make it through the kind of testing process, and only sort of 0.1% of the content that's written and bought actually ends up in front of us. Which is why, if you look at the movies, it's all Marvel, 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 DC, 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 or Charlize Theron. You know, like that's because the model is set up that they need maximum financial reward for the biggest possible audience. So that's kind of what we've been left with.
This podcast is brought to you by Metavolve, for founders who are committed to scaling their business, but are tired of wearing 12 different hats. For founders who want to focus on their next stage of growth, but are worried about their customer and employee satisfaction. Metavolve helps you build the structures, systems, and management team that you need to elevate yourself out of operations. It's time to free yourself up to focus on growth. Do it now with the entrepreneurial partners that put your customers and your people at the core of your scaling strategy. Metavolve, empowering leaders, evolving businesses. Yeah, just on that note, so I saw an interesting stat, like when Barbie and Oppenheimer came out, it was like the first time in a very long time that the biggest grossing box office hits were not sequels.
Yeah, but they also are in a way, because Barbie's trading off, you know, like 100 years of like girls playing with Barbie, you know, and yes, they did a phenomenal job of building a brand and marketing it, but there's a nostalgia element there. And Oppenheimer, it's all about the atom bomb. Like, once again, it's all like they didn't invent something new that nobody ever thought of, and then suddenly become massively successful. So what StoryCo has done is they've gone, well, if you're going to create stuff, you need an audience, right? So the reason Hollywood doesn't do that is they're not sure that there's an audience for this thing, and therefore they don't want to spend money and then put it out in the world, and you know what, nobody wants it. Now they've wasted money, and then they kind of not only embarrassed, but their shareholders come back and go like, why did you waste all of that money on this thing, right? So StoryCo sold what they called a creator token, which you could buy, and then you were put in this community, and then the communities get to self-select where they want to work. Do they want to work in writing? Do they want to work in art? Do they want to work in acting? Where do they want to be in this kind of value chain?
As the actual audience and the consumers of value of what they're creating, and now participating.
You become the creator and the audience at the same time. So now StoryCo becomes a platform in which people can collaborate to produce movies, videos, projects, and then because they are creating it together, they then become the audience, the consumers of it, but they also become the marketers of it, and they also become the filter of it. Now what you have is the ability to produce content for a much smaller audience, because you control the creation of it and the audience. So now, in theory, you can make a video series that's aimed at men in their 30s living in Johannesburg who's single. Like, is that a big enough kind of niche for us to produce content for? And if the answer is yes, that content can be kind of produced and created. Now, the kicker is, by owning this token, it gives you access to participate, but it also gives you a percentage of the success fee of the thing. So now the whole model is kind of shifted, where people are creating together, and Storyco as a platform will rise. So we're getting our first thunderstorm in Joburg. Storyco as a platform will rise, similar to how, Warner Brothers and MGM, like if they produce something, people believe, Paramount Pictures made this, it's going to be good. So Storyco is building a brand that'll build up. So if it's a Storyco production, your audience and the creators will start to learn that this is a good thing. But then the way they create it is completely different, because there's incentive for people to show up and create stuff, knowing that in the beginning we're going to create a lot of stuff and nothing might happen, but the good stuff is going to kind of filter through, and any work that you contribute will then be kind of filtered back to you in terms of acknowledgement and financial kind of rewards. So you can create an entirely new way of interfacing with people that wasn't available before, because people aren't going to show up in a community and just participate for Paramount or for HBO. Like, hey, writers, everybody come on Wednesday and we're going to write a whole bunch of scripts for HBO. And we've got characters and you're going to flesh out the detail of it, and you're going to kind of, write dialogue for these scenes and whatever. If it's successful, maybe we'll give you something. Like, people aren't going to do that because they don't feel, they're going to feel like HBO is getting all of the value and I'm getting nothing out of it. Maybe they would, because they're like, this is my big break. But when you create with people, it creates that kind of community. And I think these community-based products are going to be the next big kind of iteration of success, because essentially you're creating an audience, while you're building the thing. So once again, de-risking yourself, that by the time the show comes out,
it's going to be consumed.
It's going to be consumed at least to the level that we can kind of control. Yes. And maybe it'll spill out of that ring and then become kind of massively successful. But it's already got enough people who want to buy it, because those people are here contributing, building it, and watching it kind of come to life as it happens. So it's a fascinating shift in how we can create things as companies.
The three things I'll quickly understand for the Storyco example, right? Number one, were the founders, did they decide how many tokens they were going to give out, right? What for, right? And then also the price of them.
Yes, so they decided how many they were going to give out. They decided how much they would be. And then they also filtered who they would sell them to.
That was going to be part of my third question, because the point of like collaboration here and getting them involved is like, it's the same. Like I ascribe to meritocracy. So the point is like, just because someone purchased this, like if you give a crap idea, it's a crap idea. I don't care how much of it you own. It's like, and so that's like how much responsibility is there? What are the veto rights? How do these people participate?
Well, the system will wash this out. So if you're not a writer and you buy a token and you show up and you start writing stuff, the organism, the community organism just won't. They're not going to carry your ideas further than the initial kind of phase. So it's not like you're going to suddenly be like, well, that was my idea, I designed that thing, and now we're making bad product. Like the idea of like when these good people collaborate together, like the good ideas float up and the bad ideas kind of fade away.
So
they were very careful on who they let into their community. So, and you don't have to be. You could be like a Nike would be more free with who they let into their community. With Storyco, it's like, we need people. If you're going to join the acting thing, what kind of an actor are you? Yeah. Like, what have you done? If you're going to be a writer, can you show some of your writing? So you can kind of filter that sort of stuff and create that thing. But I guess the interesting thing here for a small company is you can't naturally tap into or hire 30 writers. Like, you just don't have the budget to hire 30 writers and put them on staff. You also don't have the pull in terms of the scale of who you are, that those writers are going to write on their own and then bring you their finished work. So this is a way of kind of finding a third way, which is you can agree to the mission that we're making here, and we're going to work together and we're going to share in the collective success of the product. Now, Storyco retains the ownership of their brand, but the individuals inside the Storyco ecosystem have a shared ownership of the IP that's created there. And the token is the thing that allows those people to have that shared thing. So if I want to sell my token and the IP that comes with it, I can sell it to somebody else if they choose to pay me fair market value. So I can opt out of this thing. And this is where it becomes very different to things before, right? So you can buy into a movie writing club, right? Or even join up. But ultimately, your membership is not worth anything. That my token for StoryCo is worth more today than it was when I bought it, not because of kind of some sort of a Ponzi scheme, but because they've now successfully delivered 3 projects. There's, an ownership layer in those projects. The IP is starting to come, the brand is starting to lift, and there's a limited supply of tokens. So now, if somebody else really wants to be in the StoryCo, the only way they can get in is either the community decides to increase the number of tokens and expand the
not the founders, the community.
Creators. Well, it's a community. You can set the rules, but in this one, it's They go, guys, we need more people. And there was a big debate, and everyone was like, you're right, 200 people's not enough to run 3 projects simultaneously. So let's increase that number and have more people kind of participate. Or you buy my token. So you can buy my ticket because there's only 200 tickets to the prom. So if you want to go, you got to get my ticket off me. So now, once again, I'm talking about this brand like it's mine, but ultimately it's not. It is mine, but it's also not mine. So this is somebody else's company that they created. It's JP and Justin Alanis who created it, but I feel such a passionate ownership of it because I was there in the beginning, in the inception, that I've got this like irrational connection to this product. And because I'm running nice work and I've got a small child, I haven't been as participatory in the experience as I should have.
Still identify with it.
But I still identify with it. And this is, that's that subtle mental shift that I think is very powerful for people.
Yeah, 100%. And that epiphany I mentioned earlier that I was looking for, I think I got it a moment ago, because what just clicked for me is that in the the easiest use case I can see for this is very much in the tech space and the product building space or the venture space. Because the point there is that instead of giving people a sense of equity into a business, you can give them a token into a project team, right? So you can have like a product manager or multiple product managers with their team building separate products, and you can either have ownership into that team, or you build a specific product and you can have ownership into that product. And that's how you can attract the right Scrum Masters, the right software developers, the right product managers themselves, because of these tokens that they have and this ownership that they have over this specific product. And then you do it with the customers as well that you want to be selling this to, so that you open it source it to them, and then you're de-risking your what you're trying to build from this, without diluting your ownership of your company.
Yes. So imagine coming to this idea of building with people, not for them. Imagine you could do this with your customers, right? So you build your own product. Maybe you've incentivized your team by giving them kind of tokens in the IP of this product, and they all kind of now participate in the profit of it. But now imagine saying to your customers that you're going to buy access to this product via a token, and any use case you create using our software, any additional things you build on top of our products, we can then roll back into the product and serve out to everyone else. And you can then get potentially a financial, instead of it being just money into us, we can actually start paying money back to you because you're improving the product and the ecosystem and everything that we kind of have. So now there's incentive for the customers to actively engage with you and actively improve the product for their selfish reasons. But now, because there's an ownership layer there, in theory, they could get that product for free, or maybe that product will pay itself back because you can take their work that they do internally and sell it to the bigger kind of ecosystem of people that you are working with. Because, you and your dev team are only 5 people, 10 people, 100 people, whatever. You can only think with 100 minds. But, suddenly you put that in your customers' hands and they think of 5, 6, 7 things that you never thought your product could do, in places it could never go. But now there's a reason for them to sort of funnel that information back into you. So now you're building with your customers at the same time. So they're buying from you because you're solving their pain, but they also have an opportunity to sell back to you in a seamless sort of way.
Sure. That's the pennies dropped, or the NFTs dropped, if I could say that. But this is, this was very enlightening, and really interesting. And I can see the interesting potential. I think it still requires quite a lot of innovative approaches and thinking towards, because we used the point of Arsenal earlier. So let me look at football. Why is football such a beautiful game? Because of the rules, right? Is the fact that if you didn't have any rules, it's just 22 people on a patch of grass with a ball. Like, what do we do with that? And because of the rules that are applied, that's why you can create something so amazing. And I think it's the point here is because there's so few use cases that many people, unless they're really in the arena of Web3, how this is going to be applied and the rules that one applies when curating these communities of ownership is really where things are going to be quite fascinating. Because the use cases are quite endless, but I think it's the rules that are applied towards this and how this is governed is super important.
Yeah, so I mean, what are the kind of things that people always say in our industry is that we're early. It's super early in this technology. People don't even really know what the use cases of it are. And if you look at coming back to social media again, because once again, it's a similarly emergent technology that's ended up in really strange places. Like when social media first came out, like your gran would never have considered using it. Now, Facebook, the fastest growing kind of age group is between 70 and 90. The technology's come such a long way, and the familiarity with it has come such a long way, and the kind of ability to consume it has come such a long way that now old grannies are kind of logging in and experiencing this amazing thing that they can connect to Doris, who they haven't seen in 50 years, because they're on kind of Facebook and they can see photos of their grandkids. Yet the youth have now gone into like TikTok, and these kind so the whole industry has sort of moved forward, and the lagging bits are being sold to different people, and the new kind of bits. I mean, I'm fairly technologically savvy, and I don't get TikTok. Like I just can't wrap my head around why I want to look at the same dance 50. It doesn't make any sense to me. But it's interesting that that's where the kind of is evolved, and now that the technology is influencing. It's influencing style and culture and how people show up in the real world. So this, but nobody could have told you that that's where this thing would have ended. And I think Web3 is very similar. We're seeing the emergence of the use cases, and we've seen some of them be proved and some of them be disproved. And I don't think we've even found the most interesting ones yet. Starbucks took their loyalty program onto Web3. And one could argue that a company like Starbucks is large enough that they could custodian all of that data, and they could run this without using any kind of Web3 technology. But they were like, we're putting the Odyssey system on Web3. Now, what's interesting is because certain people had bought enough coffees, they'd risen their profile to a certain level, they were then given a token which allowed them to visit the original Starbucks roastery that they'd refurbished, that they decided not to open to the public. They only gave access to certain people.
Now, and I'll go back to the exclusivity points around demand.
Exactly. Now, some people wanted to go there more than they did want to participate in the rewards program. So now consumers had the ability to sell their profile because it's a token. They could sell that token to somebody else, and that person could then visit that thing. And
so directly what you're selling is an identification with the brand, is like come back to where it all started and get like a sense of it at its core.
I've done the grind, and I've now got a level of access. You don't want to do the grind, so you can buy my spot in the queue, and I'll go back to the beginning and I'll buy more coffees and I'll grind my way back up to kind of the level again. But what's happened is the individuals are creating value outside of just interacting with Starbucks. Like, if you sell your profile for $500, you're suddenly being paid $500 for something you would have done anyway. So now your kind of level of passion and addiction to Starbucks will notch up a level, because you're like, well, I can actually get some of my money back, and I can get acknowledged for what I've done, and I can, so now I'm going to participate even heavier. And that's ultimately what brands and companies are looking for, is that how do we get our customers to do the behavior we want again and again and again? How do we get them to show up more often? How do we get them to tell us more information, to tell us what they want, what they don't want? And this layer of ownership there just creates a much stickier, any other coffee company can come along, Vita can come along and go, we have a program too. And you're like, I'm too far into this one.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm too far committed. Imagine you could sell your Discovery diamond status. Imagine, so you do all the stuff, you exercise, you do all the things, so you're participating, they're getting all of the benefits they want. Now you don't really use Vitality, so it's of no value to you, but somebody is like, I want to be Vitality.
I want to get all the benefits of that.
Yeah, imagine somebody could give you 20 grand and you could sell your Vitality status, and you go all the way back down to blue, but you get 20 grand cash.
And you can work your way back up. Ross, unfortunately, this is all we've got time for. This has been an enlightening and educating and inspiring conversation. And yeah, I'm still going to be processing after this, because I think my eyes have been opened. But I've just got one question left for you. And like, what's the one question that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you that you'd like to answer now?
Oh, that's a big question to throw at me right at the end.
That's why I put it there.
I guess the question that I'd like people to ask me is, when they ask me stuff about the technology, they go, why is this technology interesting? And I guess if I can leave you with one thing, I think that technology is the least interesting part of this. So understanding decentralization and blockchain and what NFTs are is good, because it gives you kind of a framework. But what's interesting here, and what makes me believe that this will continue to grow, is that this is human behavior and human psychology that we've seen play out over a millennia, but now in a digital form. And if we think about every other thing that's gone from the real world to the digital world, as in Walmart versus Amazon, like the scale and opportunity in things are infinitely kind of bigger. Like, I guarantee you this concept of ownership is going to be fiddled with and played with and exponential. And in 5-6 years' time, if your company doesn't have some kind of a Web3 strategy, you've likely been left behind by the markets.
Mic drop. Rox, thank you very much. This has been, like, I'm going to repeat the same words: enlightening, educational, amazing from just as a strategy person to think about this. Thank you for the lessons, and thank you for being on the Founder Files.
Great. Well, thank you for having me, and I hope people got value.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm sure they would have, and if you're making me consider the concept of building in tokenization to the Founder Files and getting the people I interview and listen to contribute to this. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Okay, bye. Thank you.
Cheers, man. Bye.
I feel like I'm still trying to figure out what Web3 is all about, but I definitely feel a lot closer after that conversation now. And really understanding specifically NFTs, because until this conversation, my entire understanding was just around, the Bored Ape Yacht Club and what we've just seen on social media around that. But just understanding a bit about the technology, and then also to Ross's final point, is like, that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is the human behavior that's always operated and how that's going to be affected, or this is going to be a new use case for that in the application. But I think, just to summarize, my main lessons from this is that if we're looking at Web3 and this new iteration of how people are interacting via the internet, it really is this whole new point where it's not just around where we're in Web 2 is where we're able to share value through perceived value with content. Now it's going to be sharing value, but also in terms of ownership, because this content is going to be shared, but that ownership point around, and that creation and that the open sourcing of it, and the connection and collaboration and community that's going to be built in the creating of whatever is being creating is this new horizon that we're seeing. And what that means is this point around community-based collaboration, open sourcing creation, where it's not just anyone can do anything, but there's a point of view can select who gets these tokens and who kind of contributes. It's a super fascinating point where it's essentially democratizing capitalism. And with that comes a whole new era of possibilities and what can happen. So yeah, I think that's my main takeaway from this, is just understanding about what Web3 is finally, and what that could mean for businesses. Because when thinking about scaling, the opportunities now when thinking about Web3 and looking at what that can do is just how is it that you can essentially incentivize and remunerate your employees or your customers to help get a sense of ownership in what it is that you're trying to build without actually having to give equity away. And I think that's still, it's an idea, it's a question, but definitely something to be explored, because between high salaries and equity and benefits and incentives, this changes the game really. So yeah, no real clear answer for you, but definitely something to ponder. So I hope you found this as interesting and enlightening and thought-provoking as I did. And if you've got any ideas, would love to hear it in the comments around, how you would apply this, what else you want to know, and where you want to take this further. But yeah, until the next episode, cheers.